Hello everyone. That looks like a nice waveform, and we don't need that thing today because we are talking about a different RPG. Hello and welcome. This is the first of what I'm hoping to be a nice series over who knows how long, called Sharing Spotlight, where I talk about mostly TTRPGs, but maybe some video games, comics, TV, film, things like that. Specifically, things that I want to get more people's attention on, eyeballs, ears, so on and so forth. And we are going to kick that series off with Fabula Ultima, which is self styled as a TTJRPG, as in a TTRPG that is also a JRPG. And if you're not familiar with what a JRPG is, that's fine. That is the abbreviation in English for Japanese role-playing game. And what folks mostly mean by those is Final Fantasy games, Dragon Quest, Chrono Trigger, kind of the non-action RPGs made in Japan. Now, where the boundaries of this are is a little bit porous, and we'll come back to that a bit later on as needed. So, key stuff about Fabula Ultima, but before that, I want to just shout out a couple people so that I don't forget. So thank you to Yam Yam Dom and Cardboard Enjoyer for following in the last couple of days. And thanks to everybody who has been watching stuff on YouTube and commenting there and asking your questions. That has been really fun, and YouTube continues to be the best place to catch the archives and to ask questions and chat if you are not able to make the streams live. So, Fabula Ultima. This is a game got by Emanuele Galetto, who is an Italian designer. It is published by Need Games. It was a 2023 Ennies Gold winner for Best Game and a Silver winner for Product of the Year, right? So it is not an unaccomplished game, right? This is a game that is fairly well known in the indie RPG world or the worlds of independent RPGs, but it's not from an American designer. It is a somewhat specialized topic, but a topic that is connected to video games that are like really, really popular, right? Final Fantasy is a very big deal. And the game is connected to those in that it is taking direct inspiration from them, not that it's like an official or licensed game, right? It's inspired by a bunch of these things. And the other thing I want to flag is that Fabula Ultima kind of acknowledges and credits that it's partially based on the tabletop game Ultima, written by Atsuhiro Okada and published by Kotodama Heavy Industries. I have heard of Ultima, but I've never gotten to play it, so I couldn't tell you exactly what elements are drawn from Ultima. The thing that comes to mind is like the 4 stats and the way the dice system works, but I'm not totally sure, so don't quote me on that. What I want to do today, aside from giving that kind of very basic breakdown, is talk through a little bit more of what I think is interesting about the RPG, some basic stuff to know if you are deciding whether you want to go check it out, and possibly some places where I see, connections or parallels between what Fabula Ultima is doing and then what other games are doing, whether that's Daggerheart or other stuff, just in terms of how I see things. So one of the first things that made this game come to mind when I was thinking about like other games to shout out is the fact that Fabula Ultima also feels like a game that is trying to combine narrative game design influence and kind of some crunchier combat, right? Fabula Ultima credits some of the following games as inspiration: 13th Age, Apocalypse World, Blades in the Dark, Dungeons and Dragons 4th Edition, Fate, right? A lot of those are games that Daggerheart also credits as inspiration and touchstones. So noting that Fabula Ultima came out earlier, right? I think that there's a useful parallel in putting Daggerheart and Fabula Ultima next to each other as games that are drawing on some of the same influences but trying to do different things with some overlap. Right? I have not gotten to play Fabula Ultima when I was working on the Daggerheart core book. I don't think I even owned the book until after the open beta had started. But, there's some things we can look at that present some parallels that maybe are useful, right? Where we can take ideas that we have about Daggerheart and bring them into Fabula Ultima, or we can go play Fabula Ultima or read the book and then maybe bring some of those ideas back into Daggerheart if we want to, or you bring them into whatever other games you're playing, right? Because I've been spending a lot of time on Daggerheart, I'm also finding that I want to get some kind of outlet or opportunity to play or run other games, because I tend to have more fun. I tend to be a happier person and gamer when I am exploring new systems as well as playing stuff that I'm already familiar with and very fond of. So I got to play in a Fabula Ultima game run by somebody who's on Start Playing Games as Gabe's or Gabrielle, and what was meant to be a one-shot turned into a two-shot, and then that second session was supposed to be last night, but something came up in my schedule and I wasn't able to play in that second session. So I didn't get all the way through this quick start game, which I am going to link, because you can get a free quick start adventure called Press Start, which is very cute. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the link to Press Start. Here we go. For folks to be able to go and take a look at it if you are interested. Right, this is a short adventure that is meant to teach the game to the GM and to the players. It has pre-gen characters. It has some shared world building elements that are present in Fabula Ultima. And the parts of it that I played, it was a very smooth, easy to follow kind of introductory adventure that felt very much like the designer and their team had learned from some of the best like video game tutorials, whether that is JRPGs or other games, in terms of like, we're going to give you something to learn to begin with, and then we're going to introduce and tutorialize new mechanics as time goes on. Hi, QCG Aaron. Yep, hanging out, talking about RPGs. The world is bad, but games continue to be very good. So we'll hang out and talk about those for a while as a distraction from the bad things. So one of the first big things to know about Fabula Ultima is that you can go get that free quick start, which is great. There are a few supplements out. I'll talk some about what is available for Fabula Ultima later on. But now I want to talk about some core elements of the game as I see them. Something that I think is notable and really cool is that Fabula Ultima describes 8 pillars. These are things that are meant to be kind of descriptive of or part of the world that you're playing in when you play Fabula Ultima, even though Fabula Ultima does not have one canon setting. Does this sound familiar? Right, Fabula Ultima is about creating stories and campaigns that feel like they exist within or parallel to like styles of games. So you could run your Fabula Ultima game in the setting of Ivalice from Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy XII. You could make your own world. But what Fabula Ultima is saying is, here are some kind of setting pillars, core elements that we suggest you have in your setting to be able to get the most out of Fabula Ultima, right? In RPGs like was it something archive? So pillars or core pillars or 6 pillars. This is an idea that I've seen in a number of different RPGs. And in Daggerheart campaign frames, you might look at the distinctions as being parallel to these setting pillars. I think that's a useful way of looking at it. But the pillars for Fabula Ultima are ancient ruins and harsh lands, right? The world is an ancient and dangerous place. Locations separated by dangerous places. It is a world in peril, right? There are villains, capital V villains. This is a setting that has clashing communities, right? Ancient grudges, religious schisms, memories of war crimes, or the conflict between magic and science. Those are like some of the conflicts that are listed as possibilities. This is a setting where everything has a soul, right? An animistic setting. Animism is a kind of way of describing a cosmology or a worldview, right? Many people describe Shintoism as an animistic religion, right? Talking about the idea that individual objects have souls or spirits. In a Fabula Ultima setting, the default assumption is that everything has a spirit, right? So the earth, the sky, the sun, animals, objects. And because things have souls, you can interact with them using magic or science. Speaking of magic and science, pillar number 5 is, in every Fabula Ultima world, science and magic represent 2 different ways of studying and manipulating reality, right? That's a quote from the book. So you're going to have magic and technology. Magitech is a common thing in Final Fantasy games. I think even the term Magitech I first saw in Final Fantasy VI. That may not be the first thing in English that used that term, but it's where I kind of became familiar with it. Number 6 is heroes of many sizes and shapes, right? So that's the idea that anybody can be a hero, not just the princess or a shining knight in big armor, but, a thief and con artist could become a hero, right? A cook could become a hero. Thank you for the follow, Dungeon Club. If folks haven't been looking at Dungeon Club's designs, including some stuff for Daggerheart, I would highly recommend you do so because they're very cool. So thanks for the follow and thanks for being here. Hey, Dungeon Club, if you want to drop your itch in the chat here so folks can go and check it out, that would be great. I would love to give you that chance to get a shout out. The last 2 pillars are, it's all about the heroes, right? So the story of a Fabula Ultima campaign is about your player characters. This is very similar to a lot of how I see the advice in Daggerheart operating. And then the last pillar is mystery, discovery, and growth. Quote, this is a game built on discovery of ancient mysteries and forgotten powers, but also the heroes themselves, their feelings, and what they're willing to do in order to fight against the darkness. I started paraphrasing there. So we've got those pillars. That link is in the chat for folks to go and take a look at Dungeon Club's cool design stuff, right? They've got, there's some Daggerheart stuff and stuff for a variety of games, including kind of games of their own as well. So go treat yourself and take a look. So these 8 pillars can manifest in a bunch of different ways in a variety of settings, but the game is encouraging us, as I see it, to bring those pillars to whatever setting we are using or creating for Fabula Ultima, right? It's like, whatever else you do, have these in your setting, because Fabula Ultima is kind of expecting that these will exist, right? The game is built on top of or woven between these pillars. Right, if you do like a cat's cradle, right, your fingers are then the pillars, and then all the string, that's the world and story you're telling, would be the textiles metaphor. Next thing about Fabula Ultima that may be familiar or has some parallels to Daggerheart is that the core resolution system, you're always rolling 2 dice. The rest is pretty different. In Fabula Ultima, you have 4 stats. They are dexterity, might, insight, and willpower. And these stats, the value they have is expressed as a die. So you can have a d6, d8, d10, or d12 in these 4 different stats, right? d10 is very good for a starting character. d12 is the highest you can get as a character. d6 is below average or kind of more like an average person and less like a hero or protagonist. So there's different arrays of stat values and ranges that you can pick for your character, right? You could have all d8s, or you could have a couple d8s, a d10, and a d6. And then I think the last one is like you can have 2 d10s, but then 2 d6s, right? You're very all or nothing. When you try to do something that calls for a roll, the GM will tell you which 2 stats to use. But you can use the same stat twice. So if you're just trying to like push a boulder to get it to roll down a hill, the GM might say roll might plus might. And what that means is you take your might die and you would roll 2 of that die, right? If my might die is a d8 and I'm told to roll might plus might, I go, here's a d8 and here's another d8. If I was told to roll might plus willpower, because this isn't about just rolling the stone down a hill once. This is, can you push a stone up a whole hill, right? Can you Sisyphus it? That, right? That's might. Do you have the strength to push it? Willpower. Do you have the will to keep going? Almost, do you have the endurance to be able to do that whole journey? So that creates a lot of flexibility in how you can do roles and what you can be called on to do, because all the GM has to do in a given moment is think about what stats are involved in being able to do this thing. And sometimes it's going to be 2 different stats, and sometimes it's going to be really about 1 stat, but then you can still use it because you can roll that stat twice, right? You can double your die, roll 2 different instances of the same die. Because this is always telling you to roll 2 dice, you always have some amount of a bell curve, right? Because a d6 and a d10, there's going to be kind of average values that they end up rolling. The construction of these bell curves is more complicated than the Daggerheart bell curve, because Daggerheart is d12s almost all the time. There are instances where you're told to change the size of your hope die or your fear die, but they're much less common than the spread of die sizes that you have just as a default in your attributes in Fabula Ultima. You're rolling against specific difficulties. There are times when you make an open roll, right, where you need to get at least a 7, but then every 3 points you get above that is a better and better and better result, right? This is used a lot for like gathering information. Fabula Ultima also has group checks, which work pretty similarly to Daggerheart's group checks, right? Somebody is the lead and they're going to make the last roll, and then other people make their own rolls to try to contribute, and successes there add to the final roll that represents the kind of that represents the result for the whole group. Some stuff that's really JRPG-ish, right, is there's a bunch of elemental damage can have various elements, right? You can deal bolt damage or earth damage or ice damage or light damage, and monsters or adversaries will have weaknesses and resistances to different damage types. And so like being able to change the damage type of the attacks that you do is an important thing to be able to have in Fabula Ultima. And when you're in combat, identifying elemental weaknesses and resistances is also like an important thing, right? Certain classes or other abilities will give you that, will give you the a way of basically doing a scan or finding out what a target's resistances or weaknesses might be. And because there's a bunch of damage types, right, there's more of that granularity. Just trying to keep things that are similar together as I do this overview. Something that I think is fun and really helps characters feel distinct is that in Fabula Ultima, you start at level 5 and everybody is multi-classed. You don't do, here's my 5 levels of Guardian or my 5 levels of Elementalist. Your character has to have at least 2 classes. And I think you can have a max of 3 classes as a starting character. I don't recall whether it tells you to have a max. Like, oh, could you be a level 5 character and have 1 level in 5 different classes? That I don't recall for sure. If you are more familiar with Fabula Ultima and you remember whether that's the case, you can let me know in the chat live or comment in the YouTube if no one has mentioned it in the live stream. Here I talk simultaneously to people who are watching right now and to people who are hypothetically watching in the future. This is very funny. I do this often, but this is a little bit more pronounced. So when you're having to multi-class like that, it means that when you describe your character, you can have this other dimension to talking about the character because you're not just a level 2 Elementalist, level 3 Guardian. Those are the classes you have, but who you are as a person is something that you define for yourself. And characters in Fabula Ultima have a few traits that are like important traits, and defining them correctly or defining them in particular ways is useful because then you call upon those traits, you invoke them later on in order to get bonuses. So your character has an identity, which is kind of like a description of who they are. If you were looking at the back of a JRPG like guide, right? Like there used to be the Prima guides for video games, right? I got a lot of those. I'm not sure if Prima is still around. I remember they were doing stuff with Penguin Random House at some point because I heard about it from my dad. But if you were getting descriptions of the characters from your Fabula Ultima campaign as if it were a JRPG guide, right? It'd be, Antonio something, right? Comma, and then you'd probably write down the identity, right? Antonio, comma, a tinkerer without a home, right? In the press start, quick start, one of the characters is a princess without a kingdom. Another character is like heir apparent to the throne of insert name of country. Up to 3 classes, no less than 2. Thank you, Fizzackerly. That is what I thought it was, but it's great to have the confirmation, and thanks for being here. So you have this flexibility in class selection, and then when every level you take in a class, you get to pick from a menu of abilities, and you can kind of stack. You can take some abilities several times in a row, and what you can do with it grows. But this presents a lot of fluidity and flexibility in who is your character beyond like, oh, well, I'm playing, I want to be a knight. And so I just take 5 levels of the knight class. Well, what does being a knight mean to you, right? Is it about physically protecting people and wearing big armor? Okay, well, there's a class that is focused on that. But then you're going to have something else. Are you focused on protection, but then you're also a noble? And so you take some other class that's about, aristocracy and having social connections. Or is your knight about being a fighty character, right? Where you take Guardian for the armor and protection, and then you take Weapon Master to represent your more offensive capabilities. There's no one right answer. You get to interpret, and then through the choices you make, express what it means for you, or for what it means for that character to be whoever they are, right? And you describe or define that with the identity, and you manifest it through your class choices. So identity is one of these big traits. Another trait is your character's theme. You literally write down what the major theme that your character is exploring on your character sheet, right? Your character might explore the theme of duty if you were like a prince or princess or heir to a noble line. You might have the theme of exploration if you are, a kid from the little city trying to go and see the world. You might have a theme of doubt if you were like a lieutenant to a villain who is coming to realize that this boss of theirs is actually a villain, and the way that they saw the world is maybe more is inaccurate or incomplete. So you get to choose and say right off the bat, here's what I want to explore with this character, right? Here's my theme. And your theme can change over the course of the game. And then you have your origin, which is kind of like background, where are you from? What are you familiar with? And things like that. Those three traits, identity, theme, and origin, are things that you can invoke to be able to do a reroll when you're rolling your dice and you don't get what you want. You do that by spending Fabula points, right? So there's Fabula points and then there's Ultima points. Fabula points are for PCs. Ultima points are for the GM. Kind of like hope and fear. Again, noting this game came out first. Player resources and GM resources are not unique or original to Daggerheart. Daggerheart just has its own incarnations of those. So Fabula points, the player's resource here, right? They can spend to do rerolls. They can spend them to invoke a bond, right? A character bond, and add a bonus to a roll if kind of the emotional strength of that bond would help the character accomplish what they were trying to roll. You can also spend Fabula points sometimes on like special abilities. And then the last one is a fun thing that a design element that I have loved since like the late 90s and early 2000s when I first started reading and playing games that had them, which is you can spend Fabula points to alter the story. They are a dramatic or narrative currency that you can spend to exert some influence on the world, the story world, right? The setting, the fiction. Notably, when you spend a Fabula point to add to the setting, there's guidance that says, hey, don't contradict what's already been established. Instead, add to what is known or fill in the gaps, right? So you might spend a Fabula point to say, oh, well, one of these two guards that's coming up to stop us because we're trespassing, that guard is actually an old childhood friend of mine. What was established in the fiction before was guards are coming toward you and they look unhappy. You wouldn't spend a Fabula point to say there aren't guards coming, but you could probably spend that point to say, but actually I know one of them. So this explicitly has some space for players to exert greater narrative authority or greater narrative agency on what is happening in the story world, but it is codified in these particular ways. There are other places where the GM will have like prompts or ask the players to make some contributions, but the game does with the Fabula points have a codified like, hey, you can always just use this, or this is something you can use, right? So that's more defined. The bonds exist on this kind of 3x2 axis where you can have bonds with fellow PCs, you can have bonds with like a faction, you can have bonds with NPCs, especially villains, and there's 3 different like sets of descriptors in bonds. Sorry, I've got the PDF up off screen, so I want to find the full section so that I can cite them correctly. So bonds are admiration or inferiority on one axis, loyalty or mistrust, and then affection or hatred. But you can mix and match these. You could have admiration but mistrust. You could have loyalty but hatred, right? It's like, oh, okay, well, how do you have loyalty and hatred? Well, what if you have a king who has revealed that he's evil, right? You're still loyal to the king, but you hate the things that he has done, right? Or you resent things that he's done. And so you have this mixed, complicated relationship. You can have these mixed, complicated relationships with any number of other figures in the story. And your bonds can grow and change over time. So you could have a bond of admiration for a fellow player character, but then something goes really, really wrong, and you also develop a bond of mistrust, right? You admire them because they are accomplished, because they are, skillful, because they are determined, but you mistrust them because of this thing that went wrong, and you're not sure that you can count on them being there for you because maybe they weren't there for you in that moment. And so you get that tension. This can make the character relationships really interesting, right? If the bonds grow and change over time, they're not as straightforward as you might have character bonds be in another game. And because they can change through play and have that direct mechanical application, that's some cool stuff to play with, right? When you have a bond that's level 1, right, that is one descriptor from one of these 3 sets of emotions. That can then grow, but when you invoke a bond to get a bonus on a roll, right, you invoke a bond of hatred when you're fighting against the person that you hate. You invoke a bond of loyalty when you're trying to help an ally that you're loyal to. The more of those 3 emotions that you have a bond, that your bond encompasses, the stronger the bonus you get is, right? So it's easier to help more effectively when you have a stronger bond with somebody, even if that bond is mixed or nuanced, right? That character who admires but mistrusts somebody, when they invoke a bond to help, it's still going to get that +2, even though one of those emotions is mistrust rather than loyalty. And so that's really cool. It's one of the things I think I like the most about the game in terms of what would this feel like playing in a campaign across a longer period of time. Something else I'll note is that Friends at the Table, my favorite actual play group in terms of like all-time groups that I've listened to, they are currently playing a campaign of Fabula Ultima called Perpetua. And they have 2 parties, right? One party is on the eastern continent, one party is on a western continent, but there's a bigger interconnected story, or at least so it seems like. It's early in the campaign, so some of the stuff is still really developing. But already in listening to that show, the bonds have started to become more complicated. There was an instance like what I described of somebody who felt admiration, then grew to also mistrust one of the other player characters. Now, the players are all on the same side together, so they are managing the fact that one character mistrusts another very thoughtfully, right? This is not a way of getting player versus player conflict. It is a way of defining character relationships and how they can sometimes become messy or multidimensional. So looking at all this, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Fabula Ultima uses clocks. On the Mike Underwood streaming bingo card, you may now check the box that says clocks, or more accurately, clocks, 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 because I talk about them a lot. Right? They are used in a way that is very much and like overtly drawn from Blaze in the Dark. Right? These are clocks for countdowns, for enemy abilities that go off over a certain amount of time, for completing some kind of project or objective that takes more than one roll, and stuff like that. It's a great system for being able to track things that happen over time or that take more than one roll to complete. Again, like I mentioned earlier, there are places where the GM is encouraged or invited to share narrative authority with the players, both in world building and in kind of session by session play, right? So if you dig that about Daggerheart or other narrative games, you're going to see some of that in Fabula Ultima as well. Some of that shared narrative authority also feels like, to me, it is a manifestation of the design principle or the play principle of ask questions and incorporate the answers. In Press Start, the quick start guide, you pick which of the pre-gen characters you're playing, and then early in the adventure, the GM will ask prompts, and these prompts are per character, right? They're prompts asked to the character for the player to answer, and they will do world building. They are about articulating character motivation and things like that, right? They are places where the player gets to add to the world and gets to define some of their character's relationship to it. In terms of combat, right, I talked about damage types a little bit already. There's a fun way of determining damage where items, right, if you have a weapon, its damage value is going to say HR plus something, right, which is high roll, and then you add a bonus. So when you're rolling your dice, your might, dexterity, insight, or willpower, and you're rolling to hit, you look at the higher die and then you add or subtract some value to it, and that gives you the damage. So you don't have to separately roll damage. And the way that the system operates, right, the math has been figured out so that the range of dice and then the values of the weapons makes things work for the overall combat, right? Starting characters in Fabula Ultima are going to have like dozens to 20s of hit points, and then also mind points. So it's like HP and MP, but it's mind points, not magic points, because some characters don't do magic, but they still use abilities that kind of draw from that pool of stamina or willpower. This also means that if your character has like a big might die, you are more likely to roll higher damage because that die is more likely to be the higher die, and it's more likely to have a higher value, right? So if you have a big Warhammer that is high roll plus 10, and that Warhammer is wielded by a character who has a D6 might and, let's say a D6 dexterity, right? They're kind of on the lower end for those. They're just going to do less damage compared to a character that has a D10 might and a D6 dexterity. This is assuming that there is a hammer that uses might plus dex. I'm just making one up. Because that die size is bigger, it's more likely to be the higher roll. It's more likely to be higher. It's a cool a way of having a damage system without needing to make a separate damage roll, and that helps keep combat moving quickly. Fabula Ultima also has like super hand-wavy, don't worry about it ranges in combat, such that there are two ranges. There is melee and there is ranged. If you're in the fight but you're not in melee, you are at ranged. That's all you need to know, right? You can get to somebody who is at range distance as part of an action in most cases, is what I recall. Right, so this is not even really zone initiative or zone kind of range bands. It is more like it's more like a turn-based JRPG, right, where you have front rank and back rank. Right, if you're in front rank, all of the enemies are in melee with you. If you're in the back rank, then you're at range. And then some of the enemies can be in a back rank, but then you can still run over and get to them. But then there's some modifications. Initiative in Fabula Ultima is a group action roll, right? Whoever has the best initiative bonus makes the final roll, and then everybody else makes the kind of assistance roll for the group action. and your armor or your weapons or whatever will give you modifiers to initiative, right? So if you're wearing heavy armor, you have a penalty to initiative. You make that roll, and then if the player characters succeed on that roll against a difficulty that is the highest initiative value of who they're fighting, right? So the antagonists don't roll initiative. It's just a number that the heroes roll against. If you beat it, the heroes go first. If you don't beat it, the monsters or villains go first. And then you just go back and forth. If you have mismatched numbers, you're going to end up taking more turns, right? There is an action economy advantage that you can have. So if you're outnumbered, right, you're going to be getting attacked more often. This means that thinning down the enemy's numbers is really valuable because it then changes the action economy. Folks that are familiar with something like with games that have a more firmly defined round robin initiative system, like Pathfinder or 5e, they're going to be familiar with this idea of like get the enemy's DPS off the board, right? Thin their numbers so we have an advantage in action economy. But the way that the back and forth initiative works, there's also some places where you can do some like cool strategizing where it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to use an ability that is a bonus to one of these other characters that lasts until the end of my next turn. But if I go toward the beginning of this round and then toward the end of next round, that bonus is going to last longer because you get to pick which person on your side goes when you're doing this back and forth until everybody has gone once, right? You need special abilities to be able to go or act multiple times in a single round. So you could do that kind of first in, last out thing where your bonus applies across a longer period of time, or you go, okay, well, I'm going to use this ability that makes them vulnerable to ice, and then you do your ice attack, right? And it feels like how you would strategize in a JRPG, right? Where you're trying to line up moves and buffs and debuffs to get the most out of your actions and to undermine your enemies, make them vulnerable, and then utilize it, right? This applies in something like Clear Obscure Expedition 33, right? Which is also inspired by JRPGs. The damage values in Fabula Ultima, right? They're going to range from single digits to double digits. Maybe at really high level, you would get up to being able to do 100 something damage. But there is, right? So there's more like damage math, but you do your damage with the same roll that you roll to see if you succeed on an attack. So that keeps it moving pretty smoothly. And that is pretty cool. I think the last little bit of stuff I want to talk about is some villain mechanics. I have not had the chance to GM Fabula Ultima, right? Just playing in this one shot. But Fabula Ultima has specific enemy types, right? So there's minions, and then there's stronger enemies and even stronger enemies, and the different relative strengths give them different bonuses and let them act more than once in a turn, right? So you could have an enemy that gets to act 2 times in a turn. So even if you have a party of 4 and you're fighting 2 stronger enemies, they might each get to go twice in a turn, and so the action economy is balanced. Then you have villains, and villains have 3 different scales. Right? So you can have basically a minor villain who'd be like, yes, this is like an Act 1 villain. Right? It's a corrupt mayor or a town bully. You get minor villains, major villains, and supreme villains. And villains get Ultima points, right, which is a GM resource that those villain characters have. Notably, that is a resource for the villain characters, not the resource for the GM writ large, similarly to how characters have Fabula points. A fun bit, like a little rule in Fabula that I like, is that the first time a villain appears in a scene, all of the heroes get a Fabula point. This can also mean that sometimes the GM will cut away from the scene to a cutscene where the villain shows up, and the player characters will still get a Fabula point. much like how in a lot of different JRPGs or games that are inspired by them, you would get cutscenes that that like cut away to the villain's plot, right? And so we, the audience, know what the villain is doing, even if the player characters don't. But because this is a game that is aware of the meta narrative layer, the characters get that Fabula point because the villain has shown up. Hey, Cardboard Enjoyer. I'm glad that you were able to catch this one live. Enjoy. Let me know if you have any questions as we're going. I'm probably getting toward the end. I think these sharing spotlight streams will maybe be a little bit shorter, but when I do them for games that I have played a lot more, right, or I have a lot of experience playing and running, maybe those will be a little bit longer. But I think the last thing that I wanted to shout out about the core system itself before I talk about what's available is the idea of what the villain can do with their Ultima points. So villains can also invoke traits to reroll their dice. Villains can use an Ultima point to recover from status effects and regain mind points, right? They're kind of stamina. And villains can spend points to safely leave the scene, right? They can spend this villain resource to get away, right? That can be, like basically you don't have to let the villain get defeated. You can spend a villain Ultima point to let them get away so that the villain can come back several times and torment the player characters. But villains get a certain number of Ultima points based on whether they are minor, major, or supreme villains. However, when a villain is, or sometimes it's when they're reduced to 0 hit points, but at any time, it says on page 102, the Game Master may declare that a villain has transformed into a new version of themselves, one with greater power and darker ambitions. This is called escalation. So this is, you've got your villain in Act 1 who is like the corrupt mayor, and they fight back and forth with the heroes for a while. But then when their plot to, do something mean in the town is thwarted, the GM can decide that the mayor escalates and moves up from being a minor villain to a major villain, right? And this represents some way that they have set their ambitions on a bigger scale. They have gained some power. They have rededicated themselves to whatever their villainous motivation is. And when they escalate, they move up to that new level and they get more Ultima points. This can also be like, okay, yeah, you're right. You have Kefka as a villain, and then Kefka escalates and becomes a bigger problem. You can do this. This can be, right, like Sephiroth escalates as a villain. It means that you can have a villain character who starts at a small scale like the PCs, but then grows in the scope of their ambitions and capabilities in the same way that JRPG protagonists often start out with like a really narrow focus or from humble origins, and then toward the end, by the end of the game, they're fighting God. Well, sometimes that God is the corrupt mayor who escalated and became a warlord, who then escalated again and became the god of commerce. Yeah, right. From the wooden sword to the god slayer, Cardboard Enjoyer says. Exactly. Right. And that sense of scope growth that you can have in a JRPG or the kinds of stories that they tell is explicitly built into what Fabula Ultima is trying to do, right? Your characters gain levels pretty often, but you can go up through like level 50 and beyond. So it's not like, okay, well, there's 20 levels, and if you gain a level every 5 sessions, then you can get to 100 sessions and then you're done. In Fabula Ultima, if you're gaining a level every 2, 3, or 4 sessions, right, then 30 sessions, you may have gained 10 levels, or maybe even gained 15 levels, right? So there's stuff where it's like you get abilities or extra bonuses at levels, like 30, 40, 50 or something like that. So the way you level is more like those JRPGs, right? Where you end the game and you're like level 70 something versus some of the fantasy games where 20 is the highest that you can go. And so overall, I feel like designer Emmanuel Galetto and everybody that they work with has done a really great job of capturing and translating some fun things that are iconic or memorable or fun about JRPGs and the style of story that they tend to tell, bringing those in and expressing them in a RPG that has some kind of narrative game, story game elements, as well as having some cool character customization options and some crunch in combat with damage types and setting your order for combos and some of these other things, right? There's a lot of statuses in Fabula Ultima that will impact like the size of your die or things like that, right? There's some crunch and granularity there. And some of that granularity is different or greater than what you would see in something like Daggerheart. It's certainly greater than the granularity you would see in games like Fate or Most Powered by the Apocalypse games and things like that. So it's another game that's kind of in a middle ground where there are some games, right? 13th Age is sort of in a middle ground. If we imagine a continuum from Lasers and Feelings, very, very, very loose, very, you're just telling a story, here's a couple mechanics, through to something like Pathfinder, which is really quite crunchy. There's stuff beyond Pathfinder, I think, right? Something like Hero or some other RPGs, right? Like Lancer to me is pretty crunchy. It mostly draws on 4th edition D&D. Cardboard Enjoyer, I talked a little bit about the core system earlier in the stream. To give a quick recap, you have 4 stats, and when the GM calls for a roll, the GM is going to tell you two stats to use, but sometimes you double up on the same stat. So you would go, okay, well, this is going to be might plus dexterity. So you take the die size that you have for might, the die size you have for dexterity, you roll the 2 of those together, and that gives you your total. Sometimes you will get a flat bonus or a flat penalty, but mostly it's the results of your dice against an expressed difficulty. So that is a quick overview of Fabula Ultima, some things I think are really fun about it, some reasons why you might want to check it out if you have already been enjoying Daggerheart or you are excited about Daggerheart and you're looking for other games to play. I think there's some cool stuff that you could steal from Fabula Ultima for a like JRPG or video gamey campaign frame in Daggerheart, or you could take some ideas from Daggerheart and bring them into your Fabula Ultima game. I very much want a TTRPG landscape where everybody knows about and is able to play the kinds of RPGs that let them and help them have the kind of fun that they want to have, right? I don't want any one game to completely dominate the market. And I do genuinely mean, even if that is a game that I really like or like have like made things for, because if one game is made to be everything to everyone, that does a disservice to the game's design, in my opinion. And there are going to be people who don't vibe with the game, right? For whom it doesn't do the things they want from their RPGs, and they might have more fun if they were instead playing a game that is more in line with and trying to do the things that they want from their game. Right? No game should have to be everything to everyone. Understanding what a game is and what it's trying to do and how it can support you in telling stories, I think is a great skill to develop, and curiosity and excitement to read broadly, to investigate the broad world of TTRPGs and find a game that seems like it's really nicely in sync with what you want from a given campaign or a one-shot or whatever. I have found such joy in doing that, and I've played similar kinds of stories with different systems, and then understanding that one or the other of those systems pursued or enabled that type of story in a way that was way more up my alley. This is not to say that any of those games are better games or worse games. For me, it's about understanding what a game supports you in doing, what a game tells you it is for, and figuring out how to match your creative agenda with the tools that a given game is providing you so that you can kind of get the most out of it, have the most fun, be the happiest with your experience in RPGs. So, that said, I will leave us with, here's the website for Fabula Ultima. Right now, you can go and get Press Start, that quick start adventure. You should be able to get it for free on places like DriveThruRPG. Maybe there's a direct download from the website. I don't recall. There is a core rulebook, which is this thing. This was like $30 or $40 when I got it at Gen Con, right? It's a soft cover. It's not especially expensive. And then there are 3 kind of setting atlases, right? There's one for high fantasy, one for techno fantasy, like Final Fantasy VII would be techno fantasy, or maybe something like Xenogears would be techno fantasy. And then the third one is natural fantasy. If you have been following Legends in the Mist, it describes that game as, the game describes itself as rustic fantasy. I think there's some solid overlap between rustic fantasy and natural fantasy in terms of what they're going for. Natural fantasy may also be good for if you want some stuff that is like drawing on influences like Princess Mononoke or some of the like pastoral elements of some Studio Ghibli works. Natural fantasy is also maybe a little bit more like Terran the Wanderer, or stuff that is kind of smaller scale, right? Like the hero is a chef and a pig herd versus the hero starts as a knight, right? That's how I understand it. I haven't got to read natural fantasy. I have the high fantasy book, which I've started to read, and then I've read the core book. There is a crowdfunding campaign coming up some point in this summer, I think, for a big bestiary that will support the game. And then there's also going to be some like fancy editions with cool new art and covers or things. So you can go to the Need Games website and find the information about that Kickstarter, the crowdfunder, so that you can follow it and see if you want to dig in more and check out Fabula Ultima. So, yeah, thanks for watching, Cardboard Enjoyer. I hope you will kind of get the information about Fabula Ultima to decide whether you want to play it for yourself, right? Try out the quick start or whatever, grab the book. I am probably going to try to grab some more of the supplements when I am at Gen Con, because my understanding is that the publisher or somebody selling their books will be there, and Gen Con is coming soon. It is the end of this month. I don't know if any of you who were watching live or are watching soon on the VOD were trying to get hotels for PAX Unplugged. I was trying to get hotels at 10 minutes after when I got the email that says you can buy badges and get hotels now. And already 10 minutes in, several of the closest hotels did not have rooms available from the day before the con begins to the day after. Absolutely wild. Apparently, the weekend that PAX Unplugged is happening is also when the biggest marathon in Philly is happening. So that seems like it's not great, right? A lot of rooms that maybe could have gone to PAX Unplugged folks are already booked. Not that the marathon folks deserve hotel rooms less, more that is asking, that's creating problems because you're probably imposing more demand than there is supply. I have made housing requests of that system. I don't exactly understand what they're telling me in the emails they've sent me since, because I got a thing that was like, this is what you have pending. There'll be another email. I'm like, but I haven't gotten that email. You made it seem like I was going to get that email immediately. Anyway, it's very silly, a little bit annoying. I hope that it will end up working out. I will be able to go to PAX Unplugged. Worst comes to worst, I will do a day trip because I live in Baltimore and Philadelphia is not that far away, especially if I take a train. So thank you, Cardboard Enjoyer. I will take that luck and hope that it converts. So that is that. I want to say thank you to Cardboard Enjoyer, to Fizzackerly, to Dungeon Club TV, and QCG Aaron, as well as everybody else who is watching live, and in the future, folks who are watching the VOD and or watching the YouTube. Next week, I will have another video talking about kind of RPGs and probably Daggerheart stuff more directly. I don't know that Sharing Spotlight will be a weekly series. It might be twice a month. It might be intermittent. That kind of depends. If you like this, or if you want me to talk about more other games, please let me know, right? You can do that in the very YouTubery Twitch way of subscribing, of liking the YouTube video, of subscribing on the YouTube, telling YouTube to give you notifications when new videos show up, all of that kind of stuff. You know, leaving comments of encouragement or any of your questions on the YouTube, all that kind of stuff. And as a reminder, these streams are supported in part by the fact that it is hard for me to type and speak at the same time. Sorry. My Patreon is at patreon.com/MichaelRUnderwood. And I have some other stuff about Daggerheart there, right? I've got some essays. I've got a big essay about developing your shared storytelling skills as a TTRPG player and game master. There's some stuff about an upcoming campaign frame that I'm going to be publishing. I am hearing that there's going to be, or that the homebrew kit for Daggerheart will be released at or around Gen Con. That seems pretty firm. And I'm hearing, but this is third hand, so don't quote me on it, that there may be some kind of update to the community gaming license that happens around that time as well. I have zero inside information on what that would be, if it is actually going to happen. But because the homebrew kit is coming, and because there might be this update, and because of kind of the stuff that I've got going on, I'm probably going to focus on new homebrew and like commercial releases of community gaming license stuff after Gen Con, right? Once all this stuff has come out, any changes in the license that happen around then, if that is in fact happening. So for the right now, most of my or just about all my Daggerheart stuff is going to be talking about the game, and then I'll be making to publish and sell stuff for the game kind of starting after Gen Con. For folks who were curious about that. It's very silly that I announced that here on a stream that's not primarily about Daggerheart, but it came to mind. I thought I would go ahead and mention it. I will mention it on my Patreon as well. So that has been your digression. If you are here now, you got the inside scoop. So now I'm going to go check who is streaming. Okay. So Katie Shee is streaming, and we're going to go ahead and go and raid her again. So Cardboard Enjoyer, I have a video about prep for games including Daggerheart. Let me just go and find that video so I can link you to it directly. Okay, so this is called How I Prep When GMing Narrative Games. And I talk about Daggerheart some, but the guidance is more how I prep this type of game in general. Hopefully that will have some useful stuff for you. In the future, I will probably do a video that is more specific, or is like, here is real prep that I'm doing for Daggerheart, just to dig in deeper. I just haven't gotten to do that just yet. And now I'm going to pick back up with what I was saying. And we are going to go and send some love to Katie Shee. Katie is a mostly a variety video games streamer and VTuber. Currently, Katie is playing Dream Daddy, a dad dating simulator, which I've heard very good things about. I've only gotten to watch a little bit, but we are going to go ahead and do a raid. And what you can do there is you can say, Team Turbo is here. I've raided Katie Shee before. We've talked. So this will not be like a complete surprise, but go check out what Katie is doing. And then I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Do, 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 do.